Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Today we will explore an important topic in financial regulation. The role of Australia's RegTech Sandbox. Is it wide, a strict tool for regulatory control, or a Flint sparking innovation? To answer these questions, I will firstly analyze the sandbox mechanisms and will give you a brief histories of Australia's RegTech sandbox and introduce the unique approaches of it. And I will compare it with Singapore's RegTech sandboxes, and finally, when face some problems arising, I want to ask the questions why the changes are needed. Let's go. The first question is what is a RegTech sandbox? A RegTech sandbox is a regulatory framework that allows firms to test financial and regulatory technology innovations in a controlled environment. The core idea is to balance innovation and regulation, offering companies regulatory relief while ensuring financial stability. In these sandbox, firms will receive the reduced regulatory burdens, temporary exemptions from certain laws, increased guidance from regulators, and expedient regulatory approvals. Actually, it's a verbal mechanisms because firms enjoying lower compliance costs to test innovations while regulators can observe and manage potential risks before it's into a wider implementation in this mechanism. Well, for Australia, it builds its own sandbox at a very earlier time compared with other countries. And it has two phases. In the first phase, from 2016 to 2020, the original sandbox allowed firms to test financial innovations without an Australian financial service license or Australian credit license. But it had strict limitations because it only applied to firms dealing in existing financial products. It means that it don't approve the firms to issue their own financial product. Well, after September 2020, enhanced regulatory sandbox appears, and it expands the eligible financial services and extended the testing to 24 months. But I want to mention that although broader scope and longer durations is accomplished, lower regulatory engagement remains a challenge. Yeah, many scholars describe the Australian sandbox as a unique model because it operates on a non-authorization model, meaning that firms only need to notify ASIC instead of applying for approval from the supervisor. Yeah, to ensure quality, firms must have a sponsor. It has been recognized by ASIC as a gatekeeper, unlike other countries choose a more flexible approach. Thirdly, reporting is not mandatory for Australian sandbox, which means that firms are encouraged but not required to submit midterm and final reports. Finally, ASIC, also a supervisor, offers no interaction during testing and can terminate firms at any time for lacking innovations or profitability. So compared to Singapore, Australia's RegTech sandbox is characterized by low interactivity and low certainty. Let's break it down further. For low interactivity, Singapore actively engages with firms in its sandbox. The Monetary Authority of Singapore (MAS) provides detailed feedback and ensures continuous dialogue. In contrast, Australian sandbox operates with minimal regulatory interactions. There is no formalized feedback mechanisms, and regulators do not play an active membership role. As a result, Australian firms receive less regulatory support, making the sandbox less attractive for startups that require guidance in compliance matters. For lower certainty, Singapore offers high regulatory certainty, but by making the process transparent, MES published public records of approved sandbox applications provides clear evaluation criteria. But in Australia, there is no such transparency. And I want to mention what's more serious is that the decision to determine participation is based on subjective novelty assessment rather than a flex guideline, because reporting is not mandatory as SEC relies on independently collected evidence to make the decision. This uncertainty discourages firms from participation as they do not know how long they can test innovations or what specific regulatory expectations they must meet. Given these characteristics, we must ask, is Australia's RegTech sandbox a wipe restricting innovation or Flint sparking new development? For our analysis, it appears that Australian sandbox acts more as a wipe instead of providing an environment for risk-free experimentation. It places uncertainty and a weak regulatory engagement in the way of progress. Many firms may hesitate to use the sandbox because it's unclear criteria for success, uncertainty regulatory outcomes, and lack of active regulatory support. This is counterproductive because a sandbox should facilitate controlled experimentation and growth, not create additional regulatory uncertainty. So, facing these problems, how can we solve these problems? Dr. Didenko suggests an important reform. It means that switch Australian model, non-authoritative model, to an authoritative model, and introduced a formal application process similar to Singapore's. But my question is, before implementing these changes, ASIC must clarify the purpose of the sandbox. Is it meant to boost innovations, or it's just a regulatory tool? If the goal is innovation, then greater regulatory support and transparency are needed. But if the goal is merely compliance oversight, the current structure may surface. That's all. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment for discussion, or